Welcome. My name is Kate Breslin. I'm the President and CEO at the Schuyler Center for Analysis and Advocacy, and I'm very excited to welcome you to an update on the Child Poverty Reduction Act and the work ahead. We're very happy to be joined today by Alyson, Tarek, Assistant Secretary for Human Services and Mental Hygiene in the Governor's Office, and Daniel Tietz, Commissioner of the New York State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance. And we're hopeful that we will also be joined by one of our parent advocates on the Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council, Candace Cabral, and we're working out some technical difficulties with that right now. The Schuyler Center is a New York State policy analysis and advocacy organization working to shape policies to improve health, welfare, and human services for all New Yorkers, especially those who are disenfranchised. And we're going to start with a brief overview of the Child Poverty Reduction Act before we start with some questions for our panelists. So the New York State Child Poverty Reduction Act was enacted in early 2022. It commits New York State's policymakers and all of us to cutting child poverty in half over the next 10 years. That's the crux of it, the big, beautiful vision. It established an advisory body that includes members who have lived experience with poverty and is helmed by the governor of the state of New York. The advisory body is responsible for making recommendations about identifying evidence-based approaches to addressing child poverty. It requires an assessment of policy and budget proposals and decisions with regard to their impact on poverty, inclusive of racial equity, because we know there's gross racial inequity within poverty. So that's the core objective. Set a goal of cutting child poverty in half, generate a group of people to make concrete recommendations to achieve that goal, and measure our progress. It creates an expectation that our leaders will act with intention over time across agencies, budgets, and systems in good fiscal times and in challenging ones to shield our children and our communities and our whole state from far-reaching and long-lasting harms that poverty causes. We've seen that public policy can do this. Our most recent experience was during the pandemic, where the federal government stepped in and had a major impact, reducing child poverty for about a year with some temporary policies. So the Child Poverty Reduction Act doesn't make direct investment in families. Instead, it provides us with tools and a structure to reduce child poverty. And the Advisory Council is expected to evaluate policies that could cut child poverty, including but not limited to expanding or strengthening the Earned Income Tax Credit, expanding and strengthening the Child Tax Credit, work training and employment programs, subsidized housing, and subsidized childcare, again, including but not limited to those. So if you're interested in more data and information about child poverty, please visit Schuyler Center's website. And also I'll give a shout out to the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance has a lot of great materials on its website cataloging what's happened with the Child Poverty Reduction Act and the work of the council. So I think I'll ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and I'll start with Alyson.
Thanks so much, Kate. Hi, as Kate said, I'm Alyson Grant Tarek, and I'm an Assistant Secretary to the Governor for Human Services and Mental Hygiene. I just want to say thank you to the Schuyler Center and Kate for hosting this important conversation and your ongoing advocacy on behalf of children and families. Your partnership with other advocates and with families working directly with individuals who are impacted by poverty is really just outstanding and awe-inspiring. And I'm happy to also have that partnership with you, and clearly myself and the commissioner here because we really enjoy working alongside you on these important issues. So thank you for your work. And we're honored to be here to discuss the Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council. It's really a wonderful group that we have, many advocates and experts, and as well as those with direct experience with poverty. And there's just so much to learn from and so much we are delving into, and I'm happy to be here today to talk about this important topic. Thank you.
Thank you too. Commissioner?
Thanks so much, Kate. And I like Alyson, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be able to frankly co-chair. Was very pleased when the governor signed the act creating the council. As you may, I'm not sure that you directly said that you're on the council.
I am.
There's 17, I think, if I'm counting correctly, including the two co-chairs. My other co-chairs is the boss for both me and Alyson, and that's Ji-Hoon Kim, who's Deputy Secretary to the Governor. And then there were appointments, including a few each from the Assembly and Senate, and Kate's one of the Senate's appointees to the council. And it's, I think, frankly, not to pat ourselves on the back, it's an inspired bunch. We've got lots of ideas and lots of energy for this subject, and we're grateful for that because far too many kids are living in poverty in New York. And the governor recognized that and took action to create the council. And we've made some progress already, and I think we're well on our way with regard to the 10-year goal of reducing poverty by 50% for children. So I think I'll stop there, and then we'll take your questions.
So, and as a reminder to let you all know who are participating, you can use the Q&A box on your screen. And then we have some questions prepared for our panelists. And then toward the end, we will scroll through our Q&A box and make sure that we try and get to some of your questions. So please, as they come to you, start putting those into the Q&A box. So Commissioner Tietz, since you've started to talk about it, you've been instrumental in sort of, since the governor signed this law, in getting the first advisory council meetings structured and really getting the work going. Can you talk about your and your agency's role in the work?
Sure. Well, it was a big lift. I'll just say that. Look, I think, the statute had what could fairly be described as unrealistic timelines for getting things rolling. I think it was 60 days, and it got signed in, I think, December of 21. So essentially she signed it around the same time I got appointed. So when I hit the door in January of 22, we were already working. I mean, right away I knew that we had to get rolling on this, and it took longer than we all would have liked with regard to appointments. But when we did finally hold the first meeting, with the bulk of the appointments coming from the governor and the mix of folks in government, so for example, my colleague, the commissioner at OCFS, the administrator for New York City's Human Resource Administration, the Erie County's DSS commissioner. So we had folks in government, but we also had key advocates and providers outside of government, including folks like you, Kate. So, and so we're very grateful for everybody's service. They're all there as volunteers. This is on top of their day job. We've also organized a handful of committees by subject matter, things like housing, tax policy, what have you, in an effort to bring in other voices, additional voices as advisors to each of us. And so there's probably around, I think, 36 more folks who then are able to weigh in through the committee structure with ideas and suggestions and what have you. So we've now had, I think I'm right, Alyson, it's 5 meetings. Is that right? Is it 5 meetings? It's a number of meetings. I know it's a number of meetings, but and we've had a few committee meetings as well, and are brought on a vendor from Washington, D.C. to help us with the data, and modeling of the impact of various
Sure.
policies.
Fantastic. Yeah, the Urban Institute has a history in doing that kind of analysis, and we're so appreciative that the Governor's Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance has engaged them to use New York specific data to help us explore what we think could have the biggest impact on child poverty as we move forward, what policies might have the biggest impact. Alyson, can you tell us from the perspective of the governor's office, how the work of the council helps frame how the executive considers policies, as to their effectiveness or likelihood of changing the trajectory on child poverty?
Sure, thanks for that question. Yeah, no, as the commissioner said, that got signed in December 2021, and as Kate and Schuyler were instrumental in this act getting on the books, along with Senator Ramos and others. And at the time, I was actually within city government and thought it was such an interesting piece of legislation. And now here I am representing Deputy Secretary Ji-Hoon Kim. Thank you, Commissioner, for recognizing him, as he is the official co-chair, and I have the honor of being his proxy, doing some of the work here, which is wonderful. But yeah, it's always something that I found just really amazing about being part of this executive chamber is that the governor truly, she's very thoughtful about the task forces and the committees that she signs and helps put into place. And I know that, this is something, child poverty and the reduction of it is something she has worked on throughout her time in public service. And she thought this was a really unique opportunity to make some true progress at this time. As both of you have said, the pandemic really brought to light really the dire situations our families are living in, and it exacerbated for many families. And there were some really interesting things that happened at the federal level. So I think that there was just a lot of interest at looking, at Urban Institute, at other entities, looking at the experts. And something the governor really likes, I mentioned she's thoughtful. She really likes to look at these reports, and she really wants the experts, and not just the ivory tower experts, but those who have actually experienced the issues themselves, like two of our colleagues on the advisory council, to be part of the conversation so she can be really thoughtful. I know we have, I think, maybe almost 100 or more people on this Zoom right now, and many of you are deeply involved in city and state government policy, budget making, legislation, and you all know it's a cycle. So, as these progress reports come out every year, as we react to the executive budget as the advisory council, we're able to help opine and chime in on the budget making process, on the policy that's being put forward. And as we go year over year, over the next, we're about, I think, have 8 or 9 years left in the timeline, towards reducing poverty by 50%, we're able to really be thoughtful about what we could put forward as we continue to do the studying and the work. So, I think focus groups and task forces and advisory councils like this one are really important, so that we're really being thoughtful about how can we truly make a difference, and we're not just signing off on something that hasn't really been thought about and proven to work, and what we could do here to be visionaries in New York State. So, thank you for that.
Thank you, Alyson. I understand that our colleague Candace Cabral, who is also a member of the advisory council, has joined us, but without video. And Candace, if you're able to, are you able to introduce yourself and talk about your role on the advisory council?
Candace, I think you just have to unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, we can't hear. I'm not sure if you're talking, Candace, but we can't hear you. See if I can. Okay, Candace, it's Kate. I'm not able to unmute you. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to see if we can get you unmuted, and we'll come back to you. Sorry about that. Okay. So I think one of the things that has come up, and I know that it's a tricky subject, but I know also, Commissioner, that you have experience with housing. And I know this year, a lot happened with housing, and housing is one of the things that, we got some questions even before this happened, that we know that housing is one of the things that is very challenging for people with income, limited income. So can you talk about what some of your thinking is on how, the advisory council, but also more broadly, how we can reach people who are living in poverty with certain housing proposals?
Yes. So I think the governor's proposal on that housing compact was the right one. Admittedly, came maybe a little late in the cycle, and I think it took a bit for legislators to come up to speed, and I think there's more conversation to have there. But I think it offered the right set of incentives and requirements to try and build more housing. Look, we are short hundreds of thousands of units across New York State. Maybe at one point this was thought of as a New York City problem, but really it's a statewide problem. The cost of housing just skyrocketed during the pandemic, and it now makes up, for many households across the state, particularly low-income households, are seriously rent burdened. So we have to do sort of all things at once, which we have to build more housing, have to build in particular more affordable housing, and especially affordable housing for those on the lowest rungs of the socioeconomic ladder. And we have to offer other supports, so vouchers, rental assistance. And so all of those things, I think, are on the table and are being considered. New York City has taken some actions in that regard, of course. We've got, state resources as well, such as FHEPS. So the family housing eviction prevention, I should say, so people know what I'm talking about there. But and we work pretty closely at OTDA, certainly with our colleagues at HCR, at Homes and Community Renewal, on each of these housing proposals. I mean, just to look at some of the pandemic era stuff, ERAP, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, I mean, that was all run through OTDA, now more than $3 billion out the door. That program is coming to an end, soon. I'd say the better part of it should all be distributed by the end of this year, including for those in subsidized housing, so public housing authorities, Section 8 applicants. So we've done a lot on this, and I think a lot more needs to be done, because for low-income households in particular, housing is by far their biggest expense, and for many, are steps away from homelessness without assistance.
For sure. Yeah. Alyson, did you have anything you wanted to add, or are you? Okay. I think Candace is unmuted. Candace, it's Kate. Hi. Can you introduce yourself and say a bit about your participation on the Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council?
Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Oh, thank you, Kate. I just wanted to make sure. Yes, guys. Hi. Literally, guys, my role is as a mom, a community member, a person that is connected as well in the community, live experience, guys, with 4 children, I say ages from 5 years old all the way to 17. So my backstory is a little, when I say I was homeless, I say I like you said, minimum wage job, used Section 8, had the child tax credit. So mine is a different role compared to every organization we have there. You are having living testimonies, as in you're living in the experience. You have things going on for your kids in the community. So for me, I feel like, guys, it's like telling your truth. What's good about the organization? What was the challenging? What things can we make better? And also what things that didn't work for our community. And Kate, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Candace. I'm so glad we got you. So, Alyson, one of the things that has come up both sort of in our meetings and among the advocates is this tension between, we have this long-term goal of cutting child poverty over the next 10 years. And, you know, we in half, but ideally we all want to, you know, that doesn't mean that we're going to all stop there, but also that there are great needs right now, you know, and tomorrow, today, and yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And so can you talk from the, you know, perspective of the executive where, you know, how we can do both at the same time?
That's a really important question. And, you know, I think I started to touch upon it a little bit in the last answer I gave. You know, I do want to recognize the steps forward we made this past cycle. We were able to expand the Empire State Child Credit, thanks to Kate and Schuyler and many other advocates partnering across government to include children under 4 years of age. There's no question that is a great step forward in the work. Also, the governor was very dedicated to, and we were able to expand the state's minimum wage, tying it to a 3-year moving average of the CPI in the Northeast region to help it reflect the cost of living, our paychecks, that is. And I think that I wanted to say that because while we have this 10-year charge, at the same time, we are cognizant, the governor is cognizant, there's the immediacy of now. But at the same time, we don't want to do anything without the whole gamut all at once before there's some real thought. And that's why we are getting the data from Urban Institute specifically for New York State. That is why we have experts coming in from across multiple industries and from various viewpoints, including folks like Candace and others with lived experience, so that we're able to really, we're starting to make a difference by continuing the governor putting in place in our budget, enacting important policies like the ones I just mentioned. But we also want to be thoughtful and ensure that we're doing the right thing for the long haul. So I think that as we go, we're going to keep putting wonderful things in place, and more will come to light, and we'll be able to show more and more progress each year over year.
If I may, of course, if we had unlimited resources, we could do all things at once right now. But
100%.
That, of course, is not how it works. And there are competing interests, and there are lots of investments that have been made across the budget in a whole host of ways. As Kate knows well, the statute also requires the council to annually evaluate the impact of the executive budget and the budget proposals. So it was never going to be an all at once, right? We weren't going to like start at year 10 or 9 or 8 and like throw the kitchen sink at it. I think that's just not how government works. And we, to the point about Urban Institute and New York specific data, so we needed to bring them on board. They need to look at the current circumstance and then to tell us sort of where we are, like how will we know when we've gotten to 50%, for example, how we know that we've arrived in some reliable way. And they have a model that's well tested, not least federally. And there, for example, the numbers that everybody's using, and quite rightly, with regard to the impact of the child tax credit, the federal tax credit that happened during the pandemic for 6 months. It was their data, it was their model. So it's a well-respected, well-tested model, and that's the one we're using. So they're first going to set a baseline for us, and we have some of that now that we'll get discussed in great detail at the next meeting. So we know where we are, so we know where the floor is, and then looking at what combinations of things they'll model going forward that would have the greatest impact. So we're going to use our tax dollars wisely in terms of investments to really get at the largest number of children, those most in need. And look, I think that there's little doubting what we know from their modeling previously, but federally and others. I'll note that, for example, Washington State, it has done some of this work too, is a bit ahead of us on this. So just looking at what's been done elsewhere, I think it's fair to say that tax credits and some housing investments are almost surely going to be among the recommendations at some point, because those are, dollar for dollar will have the biggest impact, the biggest bang.
Yep. For sure. And since the commissioner mentioned, I want to make sure we say out loud to all of the people who are participating, those meetings of the Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council are public meetings. So they are always available. You can watch them on video. There's a link on the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance website. The next meeting is scheduled for August 10th. And all of the material, because it's a public meeting, the materials are also available. And as I said earlier, I would urge anyone who's interested to check out there's really some just really fantastic, deep data informed information on there. And our team has just put the link to all of that into the chat. And as a person who's participated in some of these advisory type bodies before, I'm very appreciative of that, that attentiveness to the making things publicly available. And then even
we followed the red letter of the open meetings law. As everybody knows, it's frankly torture. Yep. But we do it exactly as required, and so that's why it's all there.
Yep, I can imagine it's torture when you're the one doing it.
All right, and I do want to shout out to Isaac McGinn on OTDA's staff. Honestly, without Isaac, there wouldn't be a thing. So we are so grateful for him and his team, Kat and everyone making this possible.
Agree. Thank you. Yeah.
Ditto.
Yeah. Alyson, thank you. They've been fantastic. Actually, and I think Candace would say the same, just because Candace and I spoke the other day about Isaac.
Yeah, literally, guys, I really wanted to thank him so much, because throughout this council, just, getting your living testimony, just, overnight, guys, days, me and Isaac, he's really been a person that I can honestly look to, like you said, and even Kate, just even Pete. So I can name a lot of people in our community, literally, guys, that's working behind the scenes and doing, amazing job trying to, like you said, we have 10 years, but it feels like, we don't have that long, and we're antsy to try to see what can we come up with, what challenges, and what the progress we made, guys. So I'm super proud of the progress we made, and the tax credit. The tax credit gave us a vision to actually see what's the future, what can we hold if a little families have a little more money or a little funding, what else can we do for our community? Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, and I think what I'm reflecting on in this conversation is this, when we think about why do we think this whole law was a good idea, and I think it's in part because there's no one thing that's gonna solve this big tangled problem. And every year I think our policymakers, governors over the years, and legislators and others do something often that is positive, but at the same time, and often inadvertently, make choices that we might take one step forward and two steps back. And so it's tricky, which is, I think, part of the reason we need all of us, and we need the data and the experience of the human experience. Candace, if are there any of the things that we've discussed, and you did just throw out the tax credit, are there policies that, or are there things that you have found to be particularly things that you thought would be helpful?
Yeah, okay. I see a lot of, like you said, movement. Like Section 8, me being on Section 8, I think for a person that lived in Section 8 for 10 years or established the same household for 20 years, guys, it's not taxable, through banks. It doesn't show on your record for a tax credit. So I felt like I see, Kate, that can be moved. That's, something that can be changed for renters to actually get noticeable. How long you've been paying your rent. That's one way. Another way is that I'm starting to see with just not homeowners, I see with Section 8, now you're trying to move people out of the neighborhood. You're getting them a chance to move into different areas to give them a chance to see how do the schools, how's it going to work for my neighborhood, my kids. Maybe, mental health issues might change. So a lot of different various in data. I do want to mention that we never kept data before, and the data we kept was limited to the data we have. So now it's going for all range, housing, food costs. You're paying for clothing, mental health. I want to say if you're paying for your medical bills, guys, we're trying to break it down so deeply in our community to make sure you're getting every type of detail that they need. Or just, so I love that, Kate, that we're trying to get KPIs. Community members are trying to track their performances and see what they see in their community. So I see a lot of outreach. A lot of community members are going out as parents, and other leaders are going to be in the community. It's a big thing going on. So I see if we could, funding is always the key. But if we can give organizations the authority to actually track where the money can come and what parents are using the resource for, I feel our information will go longer and we can change policies too at the same time.
And with Candace mentioning data, actually some various panelists mentioning data, I think I just want to kind of flag the attention in the law to racial equity and the need to make sure that as we're ideally seeing changes in the data that, see the poverty rate going down, that we also are seeing reductions in the racial inequity or improvements in racial equity over time. Yeah, for sure. And making sure that our data, show that as much as possible across the board. So I'm wondering, oh, go ahead, Candace.
And Kate, I'm sorry, I just wanted to mention, I know $15 wasn't a lot, guys, and I know 16 is not a lot, but I'm proud the needle is trying to move. The same way the climate is changing, we need to move with the climate. So I do see, Kate, I wanted to say, just to see resources on organizations taking initiative of rewarding their customers because being, knowing the climate.
Are you talking about minimum wage?
Yes, ma'am.
Right,
yes, Kate. So we see, pledges and community members are taking initiative of knowing that $15 are not enough for their community member, or even just 16. But I'm glad that needle is moving up and we're not going down, or we're not staying there.
For sure. Has there been? I know that there are several sort of pilots related to universal basic income out there in the state and nationally. Alyson, has there been any conversation yet about that sort of thing, in a broader way?
I think there's been some thinking around it, but I think it hasn't really been delved into as much as I think this group could help us do. I don't know, Commissioner, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah. So listen, I think, again, if there were bottomless resources, that would be one thing. But I think our efforts need to be more targeted than that. Some of the UBI related proposals, frankly, offer too much to too many, and then don't end up in the most targeted places. I think those pilots can be useful for figuring out the targeting. But I think more targeted tax credits make sense to me, and I think there's good evidence for those all across the country.
Yeah, we've had some really good conversations about, well, the exciting news, as Alyson mentioned, that New York expanded its child tax credit to include children under 4 this year. And there have been other conversations also about how do we get to the lowest income people, and and also other ways of, for example, expanding and changing the earned income tax credit. One of the issues that has come up sort of as we've talked together and also among us advocates has been this question of, do we just take a compliance, hopefully not just taking a compliance oriented approach, meaning all we're trying to do is get to a number, because really, of course, our goal is, well-being, it's child and family, community well-being, giving people the opportunity to thrive, and reducing the likelihood of all kinds of negative outcomes. And so I wonder if any of the panelists would kind of be interested in talking about that tension between like trying to get to a number and that larger goal.
Yeah, I can tell you that for our part, this is not a cynical effort. So, if this was just a numbers game, oops, we hit 50%, thanks so much, we're done here. And 50% of, let's just say, those nearest to the poverty, non-poverty line. So wherever we use the supplemental poverty measure, here is the one we're looking at. And you could conceivably do a thing that targets those just below the line to get them over the line and call yourselves done. That's not what we're doing. We're looking at what has the greatest impact for those most in need, and where could our dollars have the greatest impact for households that are really struggling. So I think for sure, this isn't just a numbers game, I guess. This is a human game. This is a human story about looking at helping those in the most extreme need and getting them further up the food chain, if you will, if not across the line. And I think our goal should be to get them all across the line. We should aim to end child poverty.
Mm-hmm.
So while there's a 10-year goal of a reduction of 50%, no one imagines that we're stopping with that. No one imagines that, oh, well, once we get some number across a certain arbitrary line that we're done here. This is about fixing the conditions, changing the systems, providing resources to those most in need, making a real difference in children's lives.
Right, that's completely right. And also, I think that speaks to the broader policy, because when I think about child poverty, we can't just say specifically, okay, the minimum wage, we raised it, it's going to be, attached to, the moving average going up. We did ESDC, but it's also about the other supports for the whole family and the whole community. So like when I talk about child poverty and child poverty reduction and, and the commissioner and others here, attached to the chamber, think about how we've been giving supports for childcare. We think about education. We think about how we're ensuring that people who are, for instance, getting some additional income won't lose their childcare benefits. And that, I think, is all attached, because as we lift up one generation, we lift up the next even more. So it's looking at the supports for the whole community. And I think it's so important that that's why we talk about housing. That's why we talk about healthcare. That's why we talk about mental health. We need to make sure people are doing well where they are. It is about primary prevention. I completely agree about that. It's not just about, okay, we hit this number, goodbye. It's about how do we support everyone? How do we lift up the whole community? How do we lift up all New Yorkers? Because we're all in this together.
Yeah, I think I would also add that, again, thinking about tax credits and the federal tax credit, one of the challenges here is reaching households that have little or no income. In other words, they have no obligation to file an income tax return. And that's a challenge, right? How the feds did it was, frankly, this simple website. You signed up, you had to answer just literally a handful of questions, and then they could get the money to you. But if you think about the circumstance of some of those most in need aren't known to tax and finance. You can't, they don't have a bank account to send the money to, even if tax and finance did know them. So there are those kinds of logistical, operational things are some things that we have to solve for as well. What would the outreach look like? What will the systems look like? How can we, maybe everybody's got, one of these, and you can you can do a QR code in a bus shelter and get them to sign up for something and get it to them. You know, some of the poorest households move often, you know, where will you send it? So it's those sorts of things that have to be worked through, and we're committed to working through them.
So one issue that's come up a lot, and that I think Candace has spoken to, and also that we've all heard a lot about, is this issue of benefits cliffs. You know, that there are families or individuals or parents who, you know, they start, well, as Candace said, the minimum wage goes up, they start earning a little bit more, but then they suddenly lose access to childcare assistance or food assistance or food assistance, and even Section 8 or other housing. And can you talk at all about sort of the, you know, what you're thinking about that?
Yeah, in the last two budgets, as you know, we've made a couple of adjustments with regard to address the benefits cliff, to permit people greater earnings for a period of time, to get themselves more established in the workplace, and ignore more and more of that income. Candace, I may have you mute yourself. And to ignore more and more of that income from their public assistance budgeting, so that they don't lose, you know, our benefits or Medicaid or what have you, while they're getting themselves established in the workplace. We've got more incentives in the most recent budget with regard to educational programs. So to give people childcare and to get people support while they're doing education, and in the months or up to a year following that education, ignore that additional income for the same reason. And I think more still can be done there, and I would expect that the council will come with some recommendations in this regard going forward.
Hey, Candace, I wanted to make sure if you had anything you wanted to add about that issue, and about cliffs, benefits cliffs, you know, like kind of getting kicked off of one thing when your income goes up. I just wanted to make sure you had the chance to.
Yes, ma'am. I would say, you know, that's the hardest thing. You know, these organizations are designed for, you know, people that are low income. You know, when you come to these organizations, guys, you already don't have no income. So when you get the income that they give you, and for you to go up, like you said, get a job, or if you need childcare, or if you're volunteering, guys, your cash assistance will get dropped. One thing I wanted to mention, Kate, is that you can be a single person as a female or a male. You can be a mother of one, a mother of four, and we're all getting the same amount for our cash assistance. So I would love to see that change for different people in their household, or subsidy somehow, you know, because that doesn't make sense. Or even stamps, guys, you know, knowing that you have kids and what was beneficial helping before, that is not helping now. I'm starting to see a lot of parents going back to pantries, or trying to, you know, like save food, or basically harvest food. I see a lot of people gardening. I see a lot of people, you know, trying to stretch just the little ends meet that you have. So I don't feel, you know, okay, a lot of things can change, but like you said, just helping the person based on need. So we're meeting them where they are. So if they need transportation, or if they're needing housing, we're not just helping them at that moment and just ship them off. How are you going to maintain this vehicle? Let's just see if she has mental, you know, case management. Let's save up money. So in case something go wrong with the vehicle or the house, you're teaching us how to make sure we're managing our money, or you're saving. So I feel like it could be other programs included with DSS to make sure that they're reaching and helping the people that's coming to their service. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, what Candace is referring to there, of course, is the standard of need, to use the public assistance parlance. And I should note that in this most recent budget, we are also now ignoring more assets. So to get at what Candace is mentioning with regard to an automobile, or so people can keep, or can, you know, their public assistance benefits even with greater assets than they once had, recognizing that that vehicle may be the only thing that's giving you an opportunity in terms of employment or education. That vehicle is necessary. I do think that there's likely to be some recommendations from the council with regard to the standard of need and making adjustments to that.
So I'd encourage folks to continue to ask questions. I want to mention too that in addition to the full council meeting in August, there are committee meetings, you know, and those are typically available on the website. Also, though, that Schuyler Center, this is the first kind of panel conversation that we're planning on hosting to explore. So this is sort of our big picture one, thinking about the work of the Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council. And in subsequent ones, we're gonna skip July, but we'll do August, and going forward for several months, we'll be exploring the intersections of some of the topic areas with child poverty and potential solutions. So we're looking at sort of the intersection between health and child poverty, intersections of child welfare and child poverty, and then potential solutions. So I just wanted to put that out there, and we're hopeful that you all continue to join us and tell your friends, because as I said from the start, you know, this is really all of us. We can't just, you know, once the law got passed, that was really just the beginning, and now's the work. You know, now is the work. And if we all together as a community aren't insisting that our policymakers focus on this and, you know, really do it, then, and this is no disrespect to any of them, then we're letting them off the hook. You know, we need to make sure we're making sure that our policymakers recognize that this is a law that they passed and they committed to, and we expect them to make it happen. It's hard. There are going to be hard budget times, but it still needs to happen. You know, and one year might be big steps and one year might be little steps, but hopefully there aren't backward steps. So I think
if I may, you know, there's always, to what you're saying, Kate, there's always going to be competing priorities. You know, the state budget is what the state budget is, and there's so many ways in which you could slice that. And this is an effort for all of us, community advocates, providers, people living in poverty, you know, families like Candace's, who should be in this conversation. We should, and again, to the governor's great credit, to the legislature's great credit, they passed this thing to actually put this in the conversation, put it out front, to bring it forward, to say this is an issue in New York that we can solve. This is solvable. And so we should take every opportunity we have here. This is an open door, really, to hearing from folks about what works, what doesn't work, what we can do, where we can wisely spend public resources to make a real difference. This is, of course, at bottom, helping low-income households, but it's also economic development money. I mean, we all know, for example, SNAP is worth what, $1.70, $1.80 for each dollar spent in terms of economic impact. The same is true for public assistance. Otherwise, like, you know, at least $1.25 for every dollar spent. So this helps communities more broadly. Every nickel is going to get spent here that you give to a low-income household because they must. And it's crime reduction, and that is in no way to suggest that only poor people commit crimes, but it is also no doubting that people do what they do to survive. And to the degree that we provide greater assistance and they don't have to make such difficult choices, then we've done something about those issues too. So I think, you know, this has a huge impact just broadly on the economic and social health of our entire state, and not least in communities of color, because poverty, as we heard in great detail at one of those presentations at one of our meetings, poverty is not colorblind. And so for sure, I think we have a social and moral obligation to fully do this task. And I know that myself and my colleagues on this council are committed to that.
I guess some of the folks, a lot of the people listening may know that the commissioner is going to be transitioning out of his position. And we're very sad. And so from the perspective of Alyson, the executive, and from the perspective of the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, what are the highest policy priorities for the work of the council in the coming months?
First of all, I do want to recognize Commissioner Tietz. We've only had about 7 months or so of my being here to work together, though our paths crossed briefly in city government. But I do want to thank you for your service and your leadership of the CPRAC. It's been wonderful working alongside you and learning from you in our time working together. You know, our charge is in the statute. So even though Commissioner won't be here, even for our next meeting, then maybe he'll come back as a guest. You know, there's a lot of really good work here. We're looking at the statute. We're looking at the areas that the statute is asking us to evaluate, and we take that very seriously. So, you know, we've had a couple of committee meetings to date. We're going to continue to delve into each one. As Commissioner Tietz kind of previewed earlier, the Urban Institute literally has just getting some of the data, like the preliminary baseline to us. So we're going to be looking at that, which I think is really exciting as we come into the first year. This late fall will be 1 year since our first meeting, and then we'll be planning to do an annual progress report, our first of which this coming winter, 23-24. So I think there's a lot of really exciting work, continuing to just delve into our initial conversations around the issues that impact poverty, and then having that annual progress report come out, and then, you know, the cycle will continue with the budget and next session. I don't want to pinpoint exactly what issues beyond those that are in the statute, but I will say that, you know, we are going to, and Ms. Commissioner Tietz, he has a wonderful leadership team we'll be working with over at OTDA, including Isaac and Barbara Ginn and others, and we'll make sure that the work continues. And you know, the executive's very, very thankful for his service, and we're going to continue the good work along with all of you, Kate and others. So.
Thank you, Alyson, and thank you, Kate. Yes, so I will be departing actually before the next meeting, although I may tune in as an observer. I'm going to keep an eye.
That makes me nervous.
I know all of you. And I know that my resignation was a little cryptic for the personal reasons I don't actually mind saying, which is that my husband's work is principally in DC, and the last several months he's barely been able to get to New York, which means unless I get there, we don't see each other. And frankly, it just became a little too difficult. So, so I'm afraid I chose my husband over you. So that doesn't mean I'm going away. So I don't intend.
Work-life balance is very important.
Yeah.
We appreciate that example.
So, you know, I've been at this for 42 years. I'm old. I don't intend to leave the work. And I would say, I mean, I saw a couple of those questions in the Q&A. For sure, we're looking at how to get resources like tax credits to people who don't have an obligation to file and don't have a bank account, and how best to do that. And there's some indications from the federal government about how best to do that. There was a question around the sort of there's a 10-year and then there are interim markers. Yes, that's what Urban Institute's there to do, which is to help us set the floor. So where are we now in New York? And that's going to be in the next meeting. There's going to be some detailed discussion around that in the next meeting. And then what are the markers? So so Urban Institute's been contracted to help us set those and to be able to report on that and to make change as we go along. I think, as folks may know, with regard to some of what the statute refers to as demo projects, so demonstration projects. So we can do pilots, we can do, basic income kind of pilots, and there are some going on now, particularly with regard to youth and homelessness, where we have authority under state statute, and we at OTA have authority under state statute to ignore or exempt stipends and grants and certain income for a period of time as part of a OTDA approved demonstration project. So there's language in statute that permits us to do that for a period of time. as part of a research project or a demonstration project. So I would expect that there would be some more of those kinds of efforts. I mean, we're always open to it. Those are usually done through a request to the local district in New York, and then that county or the city of New York then sends to us, and we review and have a back and forth with the proposer and the local district, and then go from there. But I think, you know, even though I'm leaving, the team is super committed. I mean, I don't know who's going to be the next commissioner. I've certainly made some suggestions. I'll leave that as between me and the governor's team. But I think, as I said earlier, I think everybody's very committed to doing what needs to be done.
Great. Thank you both. I want to, Candace, before we close out, which will be shortly in a minute, do you want to tell us anything more about like what would your top priority be for the council for the next few months?
Yeah, I think Kate, a couple of them. I would love to see, like you said, just keep working on just different things. But I think for me, it's going to be changing the narrative of the housing council, the $15, like the minimum wage, even the child tax credit. I'm glad we got it, but just knowing how much money will be for families next year for taxes.
Yep.
And even for I wanted to say for SSI too, just because I'm receiving my SSI, so I would love to see to be involved with that, like what policies or what change can, you know, help parents to not lose their benefits while they're doing other organizations. And I'll stop there, Kate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. A big thank you to all of our panelists. We really appreciate it. And thank you to all of you who joined us today. I hope everybody has a good, maybe even long weekend coming up. And we look forward to working with you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.